You're watching the JJ Podcast.
Our guest this week is Daniel Wild from the Institute of Public Affairs, a sharp, fearless commentator on Australia's economy, energy policy and immigration. And today we speak with him about the Big Australia policy, our record-breaking immigration numbers and the cultural debate shaping our future.
Well, Daniel Wild, Deputy Executive Director of the Institute of Public Affairs, thank you so much for joining us today, especially while you're here in Sydney. We really appreciate it.
Oh, great to be here. Thanks for having a chat.
So, Daniel, I just want to talk to you today about a subject that is certainly making headlines. And I know that it can be quite controversial at times, the way that the discussion goes about. But I think coming from the IPA, we can delve into the research that is coming out. But this is regarding immigration and more so mass immigration. Recently, James Ashby, who's in One Nation, was on Credlin and was asked about recent research from the IPA that showed that the Big Australia policy is on steroids. Tell us about this research and what it's revealed about Australia's numbers.
Yeah, sure. But basically we get data out from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, which is all the official data. So people will say the IPA is making it up. We're not making it up. Anyone can go look at the data for themselves. And what it shows is that the numbers keep going up. So the most recent data that you're referring to showed that we have about 415,000 permanent and long-term arrivals that have come here over the last 12 months. Now, I don't want to get too technical about it, but there's two data sets. There's the official net overseas migration data, and then there's this data. This is a leading indicator because it comes out more frequently than the net overseas migration data, but it is an indicator, and the government's been telling us that the numbers are going to go down, but their own department shows the numbers are actually going up.
It was one of the things that they campaigned on. They never gave a number though, but when people expressed concern over what the immigration numbers had looked like in their first term, in the first few years, they did campaigns saying that it would be controlled. It doesn't sound very controlled to me. So at 415,000 a year, is that our highest annual amount?
Yeah, that's a record.
Yeah.
That's a record. When we compare it to the same 12 months from previous 12-month lots, it's a record high. And look, the point sort of here, I think, is the government is never going to really cut immigration by that much because they need it to prop up the economy. You know, we know that our productivity is going down. We're not growing fast. So the only source of growth that we really have is through population growth. Now, if you have more people coming into an economy, the economy will get bigger because there's more people spending more money in a bigger market. But it's actually the slice of the economic pie that everybody is getting. Now, if you have more people, the economy is getting divided by more people.
The pie gets bigger, but the
The
slice
amount that we're
gets
getting,
smaller.
exactly right. So we've got the per capita number going backwards or very low, whereas the headline number is growing at, say, 2%, but the per capita number is maybe 0.1 or 0.5%. So this is the problem with the migration numbers.
You mentioned before you don't want to get too technical, but there is one thing that I do want to delve down just slightly because, as you mentioned, the immigration numbers can be quite tricky. And I find you hear different numbers that are thrown out there and you might talk about it and then someone will say, oh, no, that's permanent migration. That's that level number. That's not the net overseas migration. And so that it can be a little bit ambiguous and you can skew it to suit whatever narrative you potentially want to have. And I know that Tony Burke has been caught out doing this back in September. Can you just explain the difference between the permanent migration level and the net overseas migration number?
Yeah, sure. So the permanent number is largely based upon people who are going to be here or intend on being here permanently, but you've also got other numbers, predominantly the international student numbers, right? So the international students are one of the biggest single cohorts of the migration numbers, and they count as long-term arrivals because they're going to be here for more than the way the ABS does it is 12 of 16 months. So if you've been here for 12 out of the last 16 months, you're counted in those 420,000 that we've done. Now, obviously, if you're a student, you're probably going to be here for 3 or 4 years. So one of the biggest single contributing factors to the total number of migrants coming here is the international student numbers, and the permanent numbers quite often don't take that into account. So if you do want to do something about reducing the total numbers, you have to reduce the international student numbers. And here in Sydney, we know the University of Sydney has 51% of all students are from overseas, which is far too high. And we can talk about the consequences to the quality of education that people get, but just in terms of the numbers, you actually have to be cutting international student numbers to get the overall numbers down.
Why are the universities doing it? Like, just for our listeners, are they able to charge foreign students more?
Yeah, money. Yeah.
So that's literally what it comes down to.
I think so, yeah. It's mostly money. I mean, they pay more for fees quite often, and it's just numbers. It's just volume, getting more and more people through. And unfortunately, universities, like I finished university undergraduate 15 years ago, and I had a great time. I had a great experience. I had a great education. So even in just the period of 15 years, it's deteriorated to where it is now, where they've basically become degree factories and also a backdoor path to permanent residency. Right, that's the point. The point is, okay, you come here to have an education, fair enough, but you're supposed to go back to your home country. But a lot of them use it as a backdoor way as staying here for longer periods of time. Now, I don't blame the people I don't blame the migrants or the students for wanting to live here. We're the greatest country on earth. Of course you'd want to live here. We've got great education. Of course you want to come here. It's not, the fault is not with them. The fault is with the government and the public policy. So, and don't forget, a lot of these vice chancellors are on $1 million salaries. They're on the gravy train. They're getting a lot of money coming through the door. So unfortunately, our universities have become more about making money than actually educating the next generation.
I actually had a really sad story about a migrant family. They come from Thailand, but the dad was my taxi driver, and he was just telling me about how he moved here 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And his son is just about to finish high school and he wants to do medicine. And he can't get in because he said that the international students are getting priority over the Australian students. And because he was dropping me at Parliament House, and he asked me, like, what can you do? Like, is there something you can do to fix this? And I said to him, this is obviously a really big issue, though, that local students, you would assume, would get priority over international students, but that just doesn't seem to be the case.
No, it's a good point. And the other thing you will hear from some students is in their tutorials, which is sometimes they're not even in English, right? Because you might be one of only one or two native English speakers in a class, and then you'll have all the other students speaking a different language. So I think that's very alienating, and it's very divisive, because how can you actually have some kind of commonality? I mean, one of the things about university is not just what you learn, it's meeting people. I mean, I had a great time. Friends that I've made for life. It's helped me with my job. You know, you meet people. So actually sitting down in a lecture and learning is maybe half of it. The other half is, you know, having fun and having an adventure. But
working for your future.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Well, surely this population growth, and it came up so much during the election, and it still is being spoken about so much now.
I think it's more dramatic
when
now.
you're bringing in 400,000 people into the country, where are they supposed to live?
Yep.
And that comes up all the time, that, yes, I know the Labor government are trying to offer first home buyer incentives and all that sort of stuff, but it still doesn't address the supply issue, that we're just not building enough homes to be able to accommodate for the influx of arrivals. As you said, everyone is welcome to come here, but we need to be able to balance this out so that everyone has somewhere to live and take the pressure off the housing problem.
Yeah, and I often say there's three things you need for a successful migration program. It has to be planned for. It has to be we have to have the consent of the community, and it has to be targeted towards areas of economic need. And it's failing on all three counts. I mean, clearly it hasn't been planned for. We don't even have enough houses. But you could also talk about the pressure on social services, trying to get into a GP appointment, trying to get your kids into a local childcare or the local school, or getting them to a swimming lesson and things like that. I mean, these are all real issues that people move somewhere and they find they can't actually access these services. And again, it's not just the population growth. There are other factors, the regulatory hurdles to building and so forth. But it's just basic economics, right? If you have a massive increase in demand, then you are going to have higher prices and shortages of what is available. And that's exactly what we're seeing happen.
You just mentioned when it comes to people coming in and the skills that they bring and the boxes that need to be ticked to have controlled migration and to bring them in for the right reasons. I just saw something online recently, I think it was from Advance Australia, and I'm wondering, I haven't done the fact checking, so I'm wondering if you can fact check for me. It said that of the people coming in now, only 12% of them are skilled workers. Is that accurate?
I haven't seen that myself. But all I would say is, have you tried getting a tradie lately?
Yeah.
I mean, how hard is it to get a skilled person to come and do work? So now some of the tradies, for example, are getting sucked into government projects. A lot of them work on, like, for example, in Victoria, they have the big build, and so they pay a lot more than what you could get elsewhere. So they get sucked into these government jobs. But clearly there's an issue, right? We still have a skill shortage. And what's really interesting to me is there's actually data on job vacancies. And a lot of businesses are finding they're still finding it hard to find people. And our levels are heavily elevated from where they were pre-COVID, whereas other countries like New Zealand, they're back to pre-COVID levels. So what I've never understood is we have brought in well over 1 million people in a few years, yet businesses still can't find workers, right? So something is not working there.
I read a really interesting article by one of your colleagues, Adam Crichton, and he was talking about this annual conference of economics in Sydney found for every 1% increase in net migration, apartment rents and prices rose by 5% and 1.3% respectively, which just shows that the data is reiterating the stress of the housing market, the more people that are coming in and us not planning properly for it.
Yeah, and I think anyone who's trying to rent, I mean, how many people do you see?
20, you see all those 30, videos online.
It's crazy.
Those queues of people waiting to go in and look at an apartment.
Yeah, it's crazy stuff. And this is unfortunately the lived experience of a lot of people that are trying to get a rental property. And it's just, you have, certain people in the media and politicians that try to gaslight you. Like they try to say, don't believe your lying eyes. It's like, no, this is a real thing. These aren't just numbers. Yeah. This has gotten much worse, certainly over the last few years. Now, yes, there's been times in the past where you have, for whatever reason, rental market is tight. But I think it's way worse now, and people's own experience clearly shows that. And rental prices keep going up rather than coming down.
The Liberals. Is this something, especially when you see data, News Poll recently said 2/3 of Australians want fewer immigrants. So it's not like this is something that is just being plucked out of thin air. There is actual data proving this point. When you look at the Liberal Party, and I know they're going through some other issues at the moment regarding net zero and
that's one way.
Other issues. There's just some other things going on in their circle at the moment. But I feel as though an immigration policy is something that they could really have as a winning strategy going into the next election. What do you say to the Liberals in terms of what would you want to see as a strong immigration policy? Is it a significant reduction? Is it pause? What could be something that the Liberals take?
And it's not going to drive us into a recession, because that's the thing. You've got people now, it's gone so extreme that there are massive amounts of people out there wanting to just completely stop immigration.
What's a way of doing it in a mindful, I was going to use the word gentle, but that's not the right word to be using right here, but just in a mindful, thoughtful way that you're not going to insult or upset communities along the way, but do something that is right for Australia and strong for the Liberal Party?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. So firstly, I agree with you that this is not like a left-right issue, right? There's a lot of people on the left as well, and a lot of Labor voters that are against the levels that we currently have. And I think there's a couple of things. In terms of from the policy side of it, you've got to get the numbers down. And like I've said, I would put in a hard cap on universities of 25 or 30% of their students can be international students.
So down from 51.
Down from 50. Now, that's Sydney, which I think is the highest. I don't know off the top of my head what the average is, but somewhere between 20 and 30% I think would be okay. But you've got to get the permanent numbers down. I would say below 100,000 a year, which is around where it was in the early stages of the Howard era. I think we also have to take our citizenship oath more seriously because we have problems with social cohesion, and we have a lot of people that have come to this country that don't share our values. Now, I think the overwhelming majority of migrants do want to be Australians, and they come here to be a part of Australia, not to change Australia. But we obviously have a problem with social cohesion and integration. But your point is a good one about, okay, how do we actually communicate this? Because there's the perception that if you cut immigration, you're racist and you don't like migrants. Now, there's a couple of things. You have to explain to people what you're doing, right? You can't just, this is the same as net zero.
Yeah.
You can't, I mean, you were a candidate, I was a candidate. You can't just expect people to go, oh, okay, we're dumping net zero. That's great. No, you're going to have to tell people what you're doing it, why you're doing it, and what it means for their lives. And so when it comes to migration, there's the economic side of it, which is a higher migration program typically means lower wages and fewer local jobs that are available. The other point that I heard all the time as a candidate, particularly from migrants, was what kind of life are my kids going to have, right? So they may have been here only 10 years, and they go, even in 10 years, this country has changed a lot, and my kids' lives are going to be much harder. And they'll often talk about housing. So you need to explain, well, one of the causes of this is the number of people that we're bringing in. And then I think related to that are issues around social cohesion, and that we all want to be unified as Australians under our flag, that it doesn't matter what your background is or your race is, we can all be Australians, but we have to deal with the fact that we're very divided, and I think more divided than we have been since World War II. So I I used to hear from Central Campaign headquarters that you're not allowed to talk about immigration because it puts off migrants. But that wasn't my personal experience. If you actually talk and explain, quite often you'll find that recently arrived migrants are often the most in favour of reducing migrant levels because they can see from the countries that they have left, they don't want Australia to become like that, and they can see the warning signs.
At the recent, at the anti-immigration Australia rallies that have been around the place, from footage I've seen online, they're not 100% Anglo-white English people marching with flags. There are people of all races there that are, happily waving the flag, saying, whoa. So, I think it's not a racist discussion. I think that frustrates me a lot. Yeah. There's probably been no person who's been targeted more on the racism front than like a Pauline Hanson when it comes to this. And we recorded an episode with her not so long ago. And it's interesting. You just said the numbers of about 100,000 a year. She actually said 130,000 a year.
Oh, wow.
Would be her.
Pauline's gone.
Pauline.
Gone.
Yeah. Pauline wants more. So her magic number was 130,000. Right. I didn't ask her where she got that from, but it's just interesting.
Yeah, okay, interesting. Look, I mean, pick a number, but I think something around the Howard era is the way to go. But I wouldn't look. 130 is fine as well. I won't quibble too much.
How much do you look at other developed nations around the world? So looking at places like Canada, UK, or parts of Europe and their immigration policy, and almost thinking, what could Australia learn from what's happening over there to ensure that with the direction that we're heading, what can we learn to ensure that we don't end up like a UK, for example, who seems to be having some issues with some border control? And is it too late?
Are we already there?
Yeah, I don't think it's too late. And even if it is too late, we need to pretend like it's not. So otherwise we're going to be very unhappy, very unhappy campers. But look, I think there's obviously the illegal migration and the legal migration component. Now, we don't really have an illegal migration problem here because we stop the boats. The UK does have that and the US does have that. So it's a little bit different in that sense. But one of the things that's interesting that a lot of people don't know is that the share of people in our country who were born overseas is the highest of any comparable nation. It's at about 32 or 33%. That's higher than New Zealand. It's about double what it is in the UK. And
double?
Yeah. The UK is not as high as what you would think it is. So it is a slightly different thing. Now, I think Australia has been very good at integrating migrants, certainly since World War II. I think what's happening now isn't working well, but because we are a very egalitarian nation and because Australians are very fair-minded, it is often quite easy for migrants to integrate into Australian culture. So I think we've done a pretty good job of it, but things are clearly breaking down now. Unfortunately, in terms of the answer to your question, I don't think there is a model from overseas because I think all Western nations are actually going through this issue, and it's really an identity crisis. It's who are we as a country and what does it mean to be an Australian? And related to that is a lot of the self-loathing that we will see about, well, Australia is a terrible, bad country, so, we don't have anything to be proud of. And what I often think about was, say you're a new migrant that's come to Australia, and say you moved here a couple of years ago, and one of the first things you're told is that, you have to vote in this referendum about whether we're going to have racial privilege in the Constitution. Or you're told, you go to Sydney Harbour Bridge, you've got the Australian flag and the Aboriginal flag. It must be confusing as a migrant to go, well, what is it you're expecting me to integrate into? Right, because we don't even have an agreed sense as a community of who we are as Australians. So that's one of the other, and I bring that up by way of saying I don't think we had these issues to the same. I think we had more of an agreed upon cultural foundation, which we don't really have anymore.
Do you think that religion plays a part? The reason I ask that is because post-World War II, I did a little bit of research, this was quite a while ago, about what the top 10 countries were that were coming here after World War II and that were gaining citizenship. And if you look at the top 10, there were Germans and Italians and Greeks and English, of course. New Zealand has always been quite high. And if you look at the top 10 now,
you've got, Vietnam and China and Nepal. I think Afghanistan, is in our top 10. Like, they're just completely different nations and completely different religious and moral beliefs. Yeah. So that's obviously playing a big part now.
It certainly can do. I mean, we did obviously have a large influx of Vietnamese refugees from in the 1970s fleeing the communism there. But you are right, the composition of the intake has changed a lot. And there are a lot of people that come from very different cultures and backgrounds. I think it is yet untested as to whether this will work for us or not. We just don't know at the moment. And again, I sort of come back to my point that I think there's a lot of components of Australia that I think anyone, or almost anyone, can integrate into. But again, we have to know what it is we're asking them to do. So I believe that's probably the number one problem. But I do share your perspective that at a minimum we are having an experiment the likes of which we've never seen before.
You do make a very good point, though, about Australia's identity. And if you have immigrated to this country, imagine if you were new and then it gets to Australia Day.
Yeah.
And all the rhetoric is about Invasion Day and how horrible we all are and we need to be apologising constantly. And I find even now, if I am driving around and you see an Australian flag somewhere, it's
I start
almost
beeping
like,
my car. I beep. I'm like,
yeah. But that's the cheat. You have that moment, you're like, oh, there's a flag.
Yeah,
and I thought, that's really sad, though, that we have become a society where the Australian flag is almost seen now as a bad thing.
Yeah.
And so, to your point, if you are new here, you're like, well, what kind of a country have I come to? They don't like their flag. There's people burning it at protests. Yeah. They don't celebrate their Australia Day. They don't have the bunting out and celebrate what a great nation Australia actually is.
I love the photos on the citizenship ceremony. You've got a whole room of people waving the flags. Yeah. It's so cool.
Yeah. But then they leave
then they never pick it up again.
And that's it. It's then seen as a bad thing.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. And I think that's one of the biggest issues we face. I mean, I've got to say at the school, one of the reasons we send our eldest daughter to the school we go to is, when you're doing school tours and they walk you through it and it's, this is a bit woke or whatever. The one we went to, they had, you can't quite directly ask the principal, are you woke or whatever. But
how do you vote, sir?
Woke are you? But there are signs.
Yeah.
And I walk into the school and there's only one flag up, the Australian flag. So that's a tick. And
that's
then
a good indication.
I was there on a Friday morning, which is when they have their assembly. And then the first thing the principal says is, good morning, children. Could we stand for the national anthem? Oh. So I'm like, that's 2 ticks. And then they were touring us around the library. And the principal said to me, look, if there's any books in here you're uncomfortable with, just let us know. Oh. I said, yep, just here, take all my money. Take all.
Wow. See, I like that.
So, but the point is that the kids love the anthem. And it brings them together because it is a multicultural school. There's lots of people from different backgrounds, and they love singing it because it's something that they have in common with one another. And they are taught that Australia is fundamentally a good country, that we're not without fault, but we are without peer. And one of the reasons why migrants come here is exactly that.
Yeah.
They actually want to be a part of our national journey and our national story, but they're actually deprived of the opportunity to do that. You're made to feel guilty. Like, it's almost like you're not allowed to enjoy celebrating your country anymore. It's sort of like what happened to the good old days when on Australia Day you could just go to the beach, be with your family and just enjoy living in a free country and feel good about it. Now it's like, maybe I won't wave the flag because maybe someone will be offended by it, so I feel a bit ashamed of it. And I think we've just lost that.
It's so true.
I'm going to go off on Australia Day next year.
Yeah, well, I had my kids
I actually celebrate it every year.
Yeah.
I have big barbecues and
I might deck my kids out in the Australian flag in a hat and sunglasses and make sure that they're wearing it. It's slight sidebar, but with my kids' school, when the deputy principal stood up and said, "Good morning, boys and girls," I said to my husband, "Oh my God, I've never been so happy to hear those words."
That's a good start. Yeah.
I remember you saying that. I think we were talking about it with psychologist Claire Rowe, and then we were like, what kind of world are we living in that we got excited because they said boys and girls? But just going back to your point on guilt and identity, Jaimie and I were heading into the city just a couple of days ago to record another episode, and we had a German driver. And he's been here for 37 years and raised kids here, and now he's got grandkids here and just loves being Australian. And we had a really great chat with him. But he said that he's 76 years old now, and he said that he still listens to a lot of German radio. And he just said he went back to Germany, he said, for Christmas and New Year's, and he said he couldn't wait to get out of there. He doesn't recognise the place. And his exact words to us were that Germans feel so guilty about what happened in World War II and the whole Nazi regime that they almost
bounced back off that guilt, like, yeah, we're sorry, come in. And they kind of opened the floodgates and they let in refugees at crazy levels. Yeah. And the country has really suffered from it, and the people have really suffered from it, and they want their nation back. And he said it's just heartbreaking for him as a German man to go back and see what that guilt has done. And in a way, Australia, through, as you say, having that guilt of, oh, we did the wrong thing by invading and now let's let everyone in, or because I'm white and a couple of hundred years ago, family members came over here, now I'm an immigrant. It's a really interesting identity debate.
It is, and obviously Germany would be on one, side stream of the equation, given what they did in World War II and so forth. But the guilt issue is a big one, and the point is that we've done nothing wrong, right? Even if you're of the view that settlement was bad, let's say you think that. Well, I had nothing to do with that. You had nothing to do with that. Our children had nothing to do with that. So why are you saying that we're guilty? I was born here. This is my country too. Where am I supposed to go? So whether you like it or not, we're all here together. We've got to muck in together as Australians and look forward rather than looking backwards all the time. And I think the other thing is so much of it is just based on this one-sided idea. Again, okay, even if you're of the view that settlement was bad, do you understand that what we've done as a country is actually pretty good? Equality before the law. We invented the secret ballot, which is a cornerstone of democracy around the world. We're such a terrible racist nation that at the 1967 referendum, 91% of Australians voted to remove references to race in the Constitution, so Aboriginals would be counted in the census. So if we're a terrible racist people, why do we keep saying that equality is fundamental? And at the Voice referendum, we voted no because we don't want to be divided.
Yeah.
So, even if you're charitable and say, well, settlement was one of violence and dispossession, at a minimum, I ask people to look at all of the good things we have as a country rather than just focusing on what they consider to be the bad things.
Tony Abbott mentioned that in his documentary. What's the massacre called? The Creek.
Miles Creek.
Yeah,
Miles Creek massacre. He mentions that, of course, that's awful if you just focus on the massacre, absolutely awful. But he said what he likes to reflect on is that was one of the first times that white men were hanged for murdering blacks.
Exactly.
And around the world, that was not happening. So good on those men that whoever the judges were at the time that hanged the white men for doing what they did. That was real justice that was not based on race, but based on a crime that was committed.
Yeah, that's the foundation of equality. It's not the person, it's what they do.
Yes.
Right? That's the whole point of Australia is, you should be judged based on your merit and your capacity to make a contribution, not based on the colour of your skin. I'll give you another example, which is what's called the Cable case, which happened just 6 months after settlement, where one of the convicts had claimed that they had lost or had their luggage stolen or something like that. And they actually had the right to sue the ship's captain at the time and to have a fair trial in relation to that. And they ended up winning compensation for that luggage, which had been lost or stolen. Now, at the time, a ship's captain was the top guy in society, right? And a convict was just someone who had no rights and who cares about them. That would never have happened in England, in the UK at the time, but it happened in Australia 6 months after they came here. So Australia's history is full of these examples of extraordinary sort of this humanism of treating people fairly and with dignity. Yeah. And it's just so sad that the schools don't actually... You don't even have to embellish our history. All you have to do is tell the truth about it.
Tell the truth.
You just
keep it balanced.
But I do hope Tony Abbott's book or the documentary, which I know the IPA are part of, should be shown in schools. It really should, because it's a very well-researched balance look back at our history, and it makes you really proud to be Australian, and hopefully that can then bring it back to make people proud of where they live.
Sure, I agree, yeah.
So Daniel, before we let you go, if we're looking ahead, I know you have alluded to different things throughout this conversation of how Australia's migration program should look. But as a first step or an immediate step of what we should be doing, what would you be telling the Labor government?
How long you got? I mean,
exactly.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing I'd say is I'm actually very I wouldn't say overtly optimistic about the future, but I do think that Australia's had a lot of challenges before. We have gotten through them, and I think we will get through these challenges as well. And I think one of the things I try to do is remember how grateful I am to live. I've got a great life. I love the life I live here, and I wouldn't be able to live this life in a lot of other countries. So I think what we can all do is just have that gratitude in how we go about our lives as well. In terms of the government, I would say as we've talked about, you have to reduce the numbers. If you actually want to do something about it, you've got to reduce the numbers on immigration. I would also say to the government, be honest.
Yes.
Stop gaslighting Australians about this. Everybody can see what's happening, whether it's on our roads, as I said before, getting into a local service. Everybody knows the numbers are out of control. Everybody knows we're divided as a society. Stop telling us that there's no problem, right? Because there is a problem. And I don't know if you guys saw the McKinnon survey that came out, which was fascinating reading, which showed the astonishingly low levels of trust in government and in federal politicians and in the media. And that's why people are listening to you guys, right? They're not watching the news, they're not reading the papers, they're listening to podcasts and other forms of media, because that is how you're actually going to find out this information, right? You're not getting it from the government. So I think it's in the government's own interest to be honest. If they want people to believe what they're saying, then be honest with us first to start with.
It's all about, you've mentioned already in our chat today about messaging, and what you're saying with the gaslighting, it's not just politicians. I get very frustrated because a huge part of it is on media. You know, you're seeing it right now though. BBC and even ABC have got to be really careful because of what they edit and release to kind of have that slant exactly as they want the story to look. And you're right, people are starting to come to more long form and trust sources, you know, social media influencers, for example, like, oh, that's a different take on it. That's a different perspective. And thank God we've got that ability.
Yeah, I encourage people to listen very widely to things, because people do say even on podcasts, where people get things wrong all the time. But the point is, okay, just listen to what people have to say and make up your own mind. And this is why the sort of legacy media is really dying off, right? Because they no longer have the ability to control the narrative in a way they once did. Anyone who's under 40 very rarely reads. You know, the old days used to be, you know, if you have a policy, what you would do is you put it out in the morning, you do a bunch of morning radio programs, you go on, you know, the morning show, you get a few grabs that go up, you do the nightly news, and that's your day, right? 80% of the population's heard what you have to say. That's just not the case anymore, right? It takes so much longer to reach people now than it did in the past. And what we saw in the US election was people like Trump doing a whatever it was 3-hour chat with
Joe Rogan,
right? And the beauty of that is there's no hiding.
Yeah.
Right. You can hide for 5 minutes, right? You can get through, I've done this, you know, you go, I've just got to get through the next 5 minutes and I'm out of here, right?
Yeah.
You cannot hide for 3 hours, right? If you're a dunce, you're going to get caught out. So the beauty of these platforms is that if you keep asking and you get through 3 hours and you're actually able to keep up your stamina and you don't lose your cool, then, well, you're probably going to be a pretty decent leader, right? But if you can't get through that, then that probably says something about the depth of your knowledge and the capacity to actually communicate. So.
Well, Daniel, thank you so much for your time. We really, really appreciate all your insights.
Great, thanks. And thanks for what you guys are doing.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to the JJ podcast.